Let me give you some advice. I will make it real concise. Since you say I'll pay the ultimate price, you can put a man on trial, make him walk that extra mile, but you can't hang the same man twice. It ain't right.
Gene Bruskin spent 45 years as a labor union organizer and campaign coordinator before retiring in 2012. Since then, he's written and produced 3 musicals for and about working class people. Pray for the Dead, a musical tale of morgues, moguls, and mutiny. The Moment Was Now, a musical about a fictitious meeting between Frederick Douglass, Susan B. Anthony, and other important historical figures who played a major role in the labor movement and the struggle for racial and social justice.
And his latest, The Return of John Brown, which will have 4 staged readings in the next few weeks. The readings are free, and you'll find details at laborheritage.org. So, Gene Bruskin, give me the elevator pitch on your latest labor musical.
So this is called The Return of John Brown. And it imagines that John Brown mysteriously and unexplainably reemerges in the West Virginia area, right where he was hanged. And he starts trying to sort of get his bearings and figure out how he got there, because he was hanged in 1859. And he starts walking around and he gets arrested by the local sheriff with the support of a local farmer. They're afraid that he's going to stir up the Black Lives Matter crowd because he looks just like John Brown, but they can't imagine he really is. But he says he is. And so they lock him up. And he ends up going on trial. And the judge sort of reluctantly takes it on. And he has a trial where his lawyers are the great-grandson of Frederick Douglass and the great-great-granddaughter of Harriet Tubman, both whom ancestors were close to John Brown. They find out he's in jail, and they come down to defend him from Philly. And so the trial is essentially an argument about whether John Brown was right in fighting white supremacy, and did Abraham Lincoln really learn from John Brown, and what is the history, and do we still have a problem? And the prosecutor says, no, all we have is simple prejudice. We don't have any problem. And this is all done, this whole thing is done with a whole series of musical numbers. And what happens is that the farmer who's trying to prosecute John along with the sheriff, it turns out that he's getting his farm taken over by a pipeline owner who's also trying to take over the local farms of the black farmers, and the white guy won't talk to the black farmers. So he's playing them off against each other. So it rolls out into a whole different plot direction, and John Brown unites the white and black farmers who help him escape and save their farms. So it's a musical comedy with a lot of history in it, but it's really with present concepts.
So your cultural work is always deeply rooted in history. And if you talk a little bit about what are the sort of the opportunities and the challenges of taking complex history like, John Brown and abolition and racism today and turning that into something that is relevant to today's audiences.
Right.
Something.
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris.
But the other thing the other thing that you always do is you try to make it funny, and you have songs. Those are 3. I could see you doing a straight version of that would be one thing, but to try and make it funny and have tunes, it's a pretty high bar.
It is a high bar, but it's all the same answer in a way. First of all, the way I came to this particular play is that my last play was about Reconstruction, which took a lot of these issues on. And since then, just looking at all the incredible racial tension and racism that continues to divide the union movement, the popular movements of every kind, looking at history, I decided if there's one character one white guy character in history besides Abe Lincoln, who people are most likely to have heard about, it's John Brown. And as it turns out, he's the right character, but many people who I would have expected have heard of him haven't heard of him. Part of constructing this play, even though it takes place in the present, is that I have to figure out how to work in the history of who is John Brown, so that I cannot assume that. So the opening of the play is the actual moment in the actual words of when John Brown is hanged. The judge is ruling, and the music in the background, and John Brown's final words, which we have. And my thinking about all this is that this racism in particular is a really difficult thing for people to hear. And part of the fight back against it in the schools is it makes people feel bad. And aside from why that's a phony argument, I think partly it's something that even within the labor movement, people have a hard time discussing. And so what I'm trying to portray in this show is you see the white farmer protagonist who's part of the initial arrest of John Brown end up changing in the course of this as he realizes that his own racism is stopping him from saving his land, which is the only thing he has in the world. But in order to do this, I can't just come across and make heavy kind of lectures because people can't hear it. They don't want to hear it. It's not interesting. But if you make it funny and you have the music, then people can take it in. And it's also not coming at them. It's up there on the stage. And then at the end of my shows, we always have conversations. So one example of this is that when John Brown goes into court, the judge is trying to sort of read him the rules, and John Brown is pushing back, and the judge gets angry at him and said, "Listen, if you don't behave yourself and we find you guilty, we're going to hang you again." And so John Brown leaps up, and a lot of the song is his own words talking about his life. But the way he starts it, it's a banjo song. And he gets up and basically sings this song. You can't hang the same man twice. It ain't nice. And he's locking arms, and it's like a square dance. And the judge is banging on the panel and everything. Let me give you some advice. I will make it real concise. Since you say I'll pay the ultimate price, you can put a man on trial, make him walk that extra mile, but you can't hang the same man twice. It ain't nice. No, you can't hang the same man twice. Don't you know you can't hang a man's soul? They tried it once, and here I am, unhurt. Admit it, just quit it. God firmly will forbid it. The blood of the slave is on his skirt. But you may well be of a decent sort. You may love your family and friends. You've been wrong all along. The time's come and gone. This nation must now make amends. Let me give you some advice. I will make it real concise. Did you say I'll pay the ultimate price? You can put a man on trial, make him walk that extra mile, but you can't hang the same man twice. It ain't nice. No, you can't hang the same man twice. And I joyfully on behalf of millions that have no rights you were bound to respect. Don't fight it, just write it. It's time to decide it. I'm back to say there's more that I expect. Now I may be a ghost or a vision, or I may be your worst nightmare. Don't abuse or refuse, or you I will accuse. He's sitting right up in the chair. Let me give you some advice. I will make it real concise. You say I'll pay the ultimate price. You can put a man on trial, make him walk that extra mile, but you can't hang the same man twice. It ain't right. You can't hang the same man twice. You can't hang the same man twice. This sort of courthouse scene is really serious, has historical raps versus white versus black versions of history, but it's also got this sort of comedy and subplots in it. And so it sort of all comes together. And here, the history is important because of who he is and what he represents, but it's really a present day story. And the whole point is, can I make this relevant? So what if John Brown was hanged trying to free the slaves in an armed uprising? What about today?
So I want to talk about two things. One is you talked about how the labor movement has trouble talking about racism. And I think, and also implied in what you're talking about or in your approach, is that I think we also have trouble with having a sense of humor. I've heard this from our young folks and people that are getting into it, that we're too damn serious. And it seems to me that you're really trying to confront that. And so how do you find, and that was a good example, but when you're doing this, how do you find humor? I think John Brown is not somebody that I think folks would necessarily.
He's not a stand-up comedian, as it turns out.
Or maybe he is, and we didn't know. But I mean, so when you're looking for that, what are the kind of things that you're looking for to find humor in a serious subject?
Partly the way this worked is that when I decided to do something about John Brown, there's many books and even several plays about John Brown, and he basically got black and white people together right here in the state of Maryland, outside of Harper's Ferry, and staged a raid, an armed raid, which didn't succeed, to free the slaves. And so there's much of that written and many details of his life. I thought that's already been done, and that's not relevant. It's long back. It's relevant that it happened. But I thought, well, what if he was here? That would shake him up. And then I thought, what kind of John Brown? There are many John Browns. He's painted in history, some as a religious, fanatic, of which we have a lot of them today, and as a terrorist, and he was hanged basically as a terrorist. But I saw him more as somebody who's like mischievous. And once I decided I was going to make him mischievous, then I thought, then let's have him have some fun. And his attitude is he's serious, but on the other hand, he's got a sense of humor. And I created a ridiculous situation. And the situation is that he appears today. So right away, it's almost like a magical realism thing, because he doesn't understand how he got here, and neither does anybody else. But what he represents is still here. So there is this sort of silly, unexplainable subplot that keeps coming up the whole time, where the sheriff and the farmer who arrest him, they can't figure out what to call him, what to charge him with. Zombie terrorism. Should we charge him with that? And what about carrying an unregistered rifle? Well, the rifle's from 1859. So there's this whole silly scene with the sheriff who has a really essentially an inferiority complex, but he tries to build himself up. So when you see his office, he's got a giant picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger on the wall. And when he goes to arrest John Brown, he comes in riot gear. And John Brown's there. What's that thing you got on your head? And why are you all dressed up like that? Are you in the Army? Just giving myself permission to have fun with what a mischievous John Brown would be like in a crazy situation.
Let's talk about the songs. There's a number of songs. Maybe you could just tell me some of the favorite ones, or things that you think bring out some of the main themes in the show.
Yeah. So I think When John Brown is in jail, he's sitting in his cell, and he's basically trying to figure out what's going on here. He's locked up, and he reaches into his pocket, and he finds an old rumpled up piece of paper, and it turns out it's his final words right before they hang him. And these are his final words. And so John Brown sings his song, a musical song, May It Please the Court. And it's his final words of what he said to the judge, where he talks about what he did and he didn't do. And he ends up saying, if I had waged this war on behalf of the rich, I would be being honored and cherished instead of hanged. So that sort of sets the tune on what his perspective was and what he did. When he's in jail, when he's on trial, the argument becomes what really has our history been. And that's a huge argument in all the courts. And the white sheriff gives the sort of white man's burden history, which is the complete white version. We did everything. And we were nice to you. What are you complaining about? And that's done as a rap. And then the counter argument is, which is called the New Jim Crow, which is done by the two black lawyers, the great-grandchildren of Douglas and Tubman, and they're doing a counter rap. And so this is what's going on amidst the chaos of the court. Later on, toward the end, when the action turns to John Brown's escape plan and the black and white farmers in his cell, and he tries to convince the black farmers to let him help them unite with the white farmer and get their and protect their land. So there's the black farmers, they can't figure out who the hell this guy is, but they know about John Brown. And so they say, basically, don't mess with us. Don't be messing with us, because we want our land. And then they sing this really, it turned out I had some great singers singing it, but we want our land, it's about freedom. We want our land, it's about dignity. And it's the black work farmers singing the history of how black people have had their land taken from them. And they're basically saying at the end of it, so don't you be messing with us. And they walk out.
We've been messed with forever, and a day is this more of the same. John Brown claimed, but despite your big name, why should we trust you? Ain't you a white man? For centuries we fought for the man oppressed and downtrodden, chained and forgotten for tobacco and cotton. We paid a steep price. We got nothing. We want our land. We want our land. It's about freedom. It's about dignity.
It's about dignity.
We want our land.
It's about freedom.
We want our land.
It's about dignity.
We want our land. Yeah. And our forefathers got a small piece of land carved from the old plantation, with full dedication to improve their station. Their hopes ran sky high, but all help vanished.
We've been lynched, trimmed, ignored and abhorred, discriminated and eliminated. We've been left out, cut out, bought out, thrown out, taxed out, and run out.
The eyes of the government cursed, and the eyes of the bank class never first.
But we fought. We built co-ops, unions, farmers' alliances, sometimes defiant, sometimes lion up against giants who despised us.
We want our land. We want our land. It's about freedom. It's about dignity. We want our land.
It's about freedom.
We want our land.
It's about dignity.
We want our land. Yeah. We're holding on by a single thread with no peace of mind. This new pipeline is the end of the line. A lifetime of deep hurts.
John Brown, don't you be messing with us.
We want our
It's
land.
about freedom.
We want our
It's
land.
about dignity.
It's about freedom.
It's about freedom.
It's about dignity. We want our land. We want our land. We want our
And finally, the song at the end is take the words of what became a famous song during the Civil War for the Northern soldiers, John Brown's Body, and updating the words to the play. And they're singing sort of John Brown's body lies a moldering in his grave, his truth goes marching on. And the whole cast comes out, and that turns into Solidarity Forever. And that's the end of the play. John Brown taught us that we've got more to say. His soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Lord, supremacy can rule.
You've got previews coming up, and I want you to give us a schedule. But if you could talk a little bit about, with your previous shows, tell us a story or two. You remind me of Ralph Fasanella, who was very adamant. He was a painter, but he didn't want. Of course, they do now hang in museums. But he would be upset about that. He wanted his work to hang in union halls and places where people could see them. And I feel like I don't think you'd object to having your shows on Broadway, but I don't think that's really your goal here.
No, really, I decided that partly because of my earlier love of theater before I got into the labor movement and when I was growing up, that this is a great way to educate people. You can say things that if I read them in a speech or if I wrote it up, people would just not hear it. And so the whole idea is to bring the audiences who don't come to these plays. And because theater is like opera in many people's minds today. It's just too expensive. And for the average bus driver or waitress or worker, it's for somebody else. So my first play was called Pray for the Dead, a musical tale of morgues, moguls, and mutiny. And it was about a fictitious uprising of funeral workers in a fictitious country that led to an uprising of workers all over the nation. And what I did is I worked with a bunch of unions, the Transit Worker Union, 1199 in Baltimore, the Machinist Union, to put the play on in the union halls and when the unions were having conferences and meetings of different kinds, so that I brought the play to the workers. Because I knew that if you just say, come to a musical, even if they have to get in a bus and go somewhere, they might not come. And so we had union audiences at almost every show. And things happened like at the Machinist Hall in Western Maryland, southeastern Maryland. At the end of the show, one of the workers came up to me and said, I work at Anheuser-Busch, and I just want to say that that's the way they treat us. And at one point, I don't want to admit this, but I had some tears in my eye because I felt exactly the same way, And I thought, okay, bingo, home run. And in my second play, The Moment Was Now, which is takes place in 1869 during Reconstruction, about the multiple movements of the Black Freedom Movement, the women's movement, and the emergence of the National Labor Union and the modern labor movement. We did one of our performances. We brought in students from 2 high schools, and we had, 150 people audience of like 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. And I was just really nervous that they just thought they were there because I thought maybe they came because they didn't want to take a test if they stayed home. And one of the songs was Ain't I a Woman, which is Sojourner Truth's famous speech. But I made some adjustments, and an incredible singer, Julia Nixon, sang it. And she just took off. Ain't I a woman? It was incredible. And I looked out in the audience, and this whole row of what looked like 14, 15-year-old girls stood up with their arms waving in the air like they were in church. And I thought, if Sojourner Truth's 1846 or whatever speech sung by Julia Nixon in a play in 2020 can get that row of kids up, I'm happy.
Give us the details on the preview schedule.
Okay, so there's going to be 4 staged readings, which means that these are rehearsed readings with the music, but not a full production. So people aren't in full costumes. We don't have lots of scenery, but the whole show is there. And it's an opportunity for people to see it and comment on it so that we can get the feedback and make it better. The first performance is going to be on April 26th at the Mount Zion Methodist Church in Baltimore at 7:30. The second performance is going to be at the MLK Library in downtown DC, the main library. And then the next week on the 5th and 6th, on the afternoon, Saturday and Sunday afternoon, the play will be performed at the famous John Brown Historical House, where he staged a raid on the lawn with the house right there in the background. And it'll be part also of a tour of the John Brown house.
All right. We will have all of those dates and links on our website, laborheritage.org. Click on calendar. Gene Bruskin, congratulations and thanks so much.
Yeah, and thank you, Labor Heritage Foundation, and also Teaching for Change for co-sponsoring this. 2 great organizations I'm pleased to work with.
You're listening to the Labor Heritage Power Hour on WPFW 89.3 FM, your station for jazz and justice.